Chris Markowski joins us now, host of Watchdog on the Street. And Chris, what is your take when you see somebody like Boris Johnson, who looks like his disease may have taken a step in a negative direction? Does that matter to the markets, or is this just one person, or being the head of government, does it count more?
Well, markets, when they're in a situation like we have now, they're very much headline driven. Now, today, obviously, you've got a major push to the upside. It seems to be accelerating into the close, and a lot of that has to do with a lot of the high-frequency traders out there, and we've seen that happen to the upside, the downside. However, it's going to be what happens tomorrow morning. As I've seen so far, even though he's in intensive care, he's not on a ventilator at this point in time. So, maybe just dealing with the fact that he's a head of state, and they obviously want to take some stronger precautions. Possibly. So tomorrow morning, if we wake up and his condition even worsens further, then with the market that's headline driven, it most certainly can have an effect.
You know, the president, I'll use a shorthand term, saying keeping the country shut down until the end of the month. That's not exactly what's going on, but he essentially has it in that position. Isn't it important when we go back to work? Because if this is mistimed, Mark, if it's mistimed, the cat may be out of the bag, and we have a real problem that lasts months and months.
Absolutely. That's why it's important to make sure that everybody is, we wait longer than expected to go back to work. Like President Trump's thinking we should go back at the end of April. But guess what? If the curve is flattened throughout the U.S., I still think there's another 2-week incubation period that we need to tread very lightly and cautious and make sure that this doesn't reoccur.
Yeah, and folks, as we're talking, we're showing you some pictures of the United Kingdom, the British Prime Minister taken to intensive care. There are not reports that he's been put on a ventilator, but that is a common direction when someone is taken to intensive care. The Prime Minister coming down with this roughly 10 days ago and then taken to the hospital over the weekend when he was not actually feeling better. He had persistent cough, still had some problems. So we can assume that things took a turn for the worse as they put him in intensive care today. Chris, as we talk about trying to go back to work, it must be tough for the president to get feedback from people who have their own companies and have jobs, and they're being told to stay at home, but they're not being affected like we see Wall Street, like we see literally in New York, that it's being affected. But when you live in somewhere like Little Rock or in Nebraska or somewhere else, you're probably not being affected the same way.
Listen, we don't even know. This is the first time that this type of a quarantine has been practiced in world history. We don't even know if we're doing the right thing now. When they decided to send all the college kids home, was that a great idea to send them home to see grandma and grandpa and maybe get them sick? Sweden is not doing the things that we are doing right now, nor the rest of Europe, and they seem to be holding up fine. The reality of the situation is I think the whole thing might be somewhat of an exercise in futility in regards to think that we can eradicate this until we have some sort of vaccine. And that's not going to happen for 18 months, or we're not going to shut the country down for 18 months. I understand that we have to allow the healthcare system to play catch up and get ventilators and be able to flatten it out so they're not getting as many cases. But we're going to continue to see this pop up again, and again. There's not going to be an all clear sound at saying, oh, that's it, no more coronavirus in the United States, everybody back to work. It's going to be with us for a while, and we're going to have to learn to deal with it.
Yeah, I think you may be right, Chris. Stand by, gentlemen, if you would. Let's get to Emma Reckenberg for an update on our headlines. Emma.
Hi, Bob. Yes, we just want to bring everyone up to speed here. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been moved to the ICU as he continues to battle the coronavirus. The Prime Minister was first diagnosed with coronavirus nearly 2 weeks ago. He's been hospitalized since Sunday. A Downing Street spokesperson says Johnson's condition worsened this afternoon, and the decision was made to move him to the ICU. Mr. Johnson has asked Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab to deputize, quote, where necessary. In other words, to step in for him when and if that is necessary, given his present health situation. Of course, this is a developing story that we're keeping an eye on, but that is the latest information. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson in the ICU. Bob, back to you.
All right, Emma, thank you very much. And Chris and Mark, Chris, let me talk to you. I don't know how familiar you are with their parliamentary system there, but picking a prime minister is different than picking a president.
Yeah. Well, most certainly, it's fun to watch them and how they yell and scream at each other and argue, and they have to formulate various different coalitions to obviously get that position where they can be elected prime minister. And obviously, he just helped navigate Great Britain through Brexit, which took, going back to 2016, took a while for them to finally complete this. And he definitely is, he took a very, very strong position of power, and he really, took Labour out in the last election. By far, wasn't even close.
Yeah, and just so folks know, this reveals the difference between a developed country and an emerging country, if you will, or a failing country, is that if something were to happen to their prime minister, they still have the same economy. They still have the same parliamentary system of government. They still have what is a solid currency. So, Mark, we look at this with interest, but the effect might be minimal.
I'm still going to go with my position that, I think there's going to be negative impact to this, and especially if his health deteriorates further. Yeah. And like I said before, this virus doesn't discriminate against anybody.
Yeah, I think you're what's your opinion? That's why we have you here. And if it has a negative effect, how do you think that affects the markets?
It's going to go down.
Right. Well, that's a given. But I mean, what is the psychology that affects it so that it would go down?
Just from a human aspect, I mean, people, my clientele and other people that I speak to, everybody's very fearful of the unknown. And, you don't even know if you're sitting next to your enemy because they may have this virus. And that's really the big unknown factor now. And as I said before, the incubation period could be 2 weeks until you even have it or get some symptoms and then potentially get very sick. And I've seen some of my clients on the very young end of the spectrum in their early 20s to their mid to late 60s have the coronavirus.
Yeah. And Chris, that's the perplexing part of this. It's not like there's a flag that says I have it right now, and trying to go back to work because a lot of people biting at the bit to do that. But the only thing that's ever really worked to snuff out something like a virus is just quarantining. But how do you do that forever? You can't do it forever.
It's not possible. Vaccinations is a way to deal with it. That's going to obviously take 18 months. And the reality is that most young people out there, and yes, it's going to affect young people, certain young people, but that's few and far between. 99% of the deaths that took place in Italy were people with pre-existing conditions. The majority of those people were over 80 years old. Young people also die of terrible diseases as well. More than 50% of the people, and the three different control groups that they had was Iceland, the Princess Cruise Line, and there was also one other that I can't forget which one it was. More than 50% of the people tested had it and didn't show any symptoms at all. We don't know how many people have actually contracted this here in the United States. Over 400,000 people from China have come to the United States. And obviously, since we shut that off, how many were carrying it? You take a look at California, where predominantly those people went, they've really flattened the curve there. Have they gotten to that point in time where there's that herd immunity? And that's really what's going to deal with it. More and more people getting it and becoming immune to it. Again, there's nothing magic we can do. I wish we could snap our fingers and make it go away. Okay. But we can't shut the country down for the next 3 months and expect that we're going to be the United States of America any longer.
Then what does it look like when we go back?
My opinion, I think you're going to have to start obviously testing younger people out there, making sure that they're okay, opening up slowly but surely. Still, like in Sweden, they haven't shut down the restaurants, they haven't shut down the bars. They've cut down in the size of the gatherings they can have. They're still trying to practice social distancing to some degree, and slowly but surely open these things up. There's no all clear sign. It's not Jaws where they can go out there and kill the shark. You're going to get Quentin out there, and they're going to get the shark there with the chief of police. This is going to be with us, and again, it'll probably pop up again until we get some sort of vaccine. We cannot shut the country down every single time it does.
Yeah, and Mark, what does that look like? I mean, you mentioned Sweden, Chris, and I was reading how the approach, spotty effectiveness. At first they thought it was working, now they're not so sure. So Mark, I think all three of us would agree, we can't stay holed up forever. Yet you don't want to be flippant about going back to work. So what's different?
Absolutely.
Do you go back practicing social distancing? Are restaurants going to have people 6 feet apart? What's the world going to look like when we go back up? I don't know what the date is, but whenever that is, how's that world different?
Well, I put it in analogous to 9/11. Back in 9/11, the world changed drastically, and it's going to be no different at this point. This is really a triggering event that people in our society are going to look and value things differently, from going out to restaurants to travel, etc. And I just think the American economy and the American people were so adaptive to change, and we're so diverse. We're going to get over this. Not in the short term. It's going to take a period of time, but we adapt. I relate this to Darwinism, survival of the fittest here, and America's great.
Yeah, and also, Chris, we can't forget that there are going to be companies coming up with treatments. There are going to be companies coming up with that vaccine, and there are going to be people who are willing to take part in that, and we are going to have supplies, and we are going to have testing. It probably is more a matter of when.
We do an excellent job in coming up with inventions and solving problems here in the United States. We're the best in the world at that. And great, I'd be thrilled if we have more of that money heading towards biotechnology companies than silly apps coming out of Silicon Valley that eventually go out of business in a very short period of time and rip off many investors. So I'd be thrilled to see more money headed in that direction.
Yeah.
And I concur with that. It's a great opportunity for all the devastation that this has caused, this virus, from a health perspective and an economic perspective. There's going to be tremendous opportunities for new economic developments with new companies, et cetera, that, guess what, nobody's even thought about yet.
Yeah, and that is a great part of our country. We do come up with those cures. We have smallpox, polio, HIV. We have done many wonderful things, especially when we have to. Gentlemen, thank you so much.